The shuttle landed with a soft thud on the metal platform of Research Station Omega-7. Park Ji-ho stepped out, his boots making hollow sounds on the empty deck. The air tasted stale through his breathing mask. Warning lights blinked red across the station walls, but no alarm sounded. Everything was quiet. Too quiet. Ji-ho pulled his scanner from his belt and checked the readings. The station still had power and breathable air, but no life signs showed on his screen. That was strange. The report said 3 rescue teams had come here in the past month. None had returned. He walked through the main corridor, his footsteps echoing in the empty halls. Scratch marks covered the metal walls, deep gouges that looked like claw marks. Some were so deep they went through the thick steel plating. Whatever made these marks was very strong. The Galactic Council had sent him here to find out what happened to the Vorthak research team. The official report said they were studying dangerous creatures called shadow maws. Adult shadow maws could grow as big as shuttles and tear through spaceship hulls with their claws. Even their babies were considered too dangerous to keep alive. Ji-ho checked each room as he walked deeper into the station. He found overturned tables, broken equipment, and more claw marks, but no bodies, no blood either. It was like everyone had just disappeared. In the main lab, he found computer records that were still working. The last entry was from Dr. Vorthak himself, recorded 3 weeks ago. His voice shook as he spoke into the recorder. Day 47 of the Shadow Maw Cub study. The specimens continue to resist our conditioning protocols. We have tried pain stimulation, isolation, and food deprivation, but they refuse to become aggressive towards sapient beings. This is unexpected. The cubs seem to form emotional bonds even with their captors. Dr. Zelon believes we should terminate the experiment and eliminate the specimens. Ji-ho frowned. The recording continued. Day 51, the cubs escaped their holding cells during the night shift. Security teams report they are hiding in the lower levels. I have ordered all personnel to evacuate until military support arrives. The cubs are nearly adult-sized now. If they have retained their bonding behavior, they may be confused and frightened by our abandonment. The recording ended there. Ji-ho stared at the screen for a long moment. Bonding behavior? That was not in any of the reports about shadow maws. According to every database in the galaxy, they were mindless killing machines. He took the elevator down to the lower levels. The lights here were dimmer, and the air felt colder. His scanner showed 3 large life forms somewhere ahead, but they were not moving. They seemed to be staying in one place. Ji-ho found them in what used to be a storage room. 3 creatures huddled together in the corner, and they were nothing like he expected. The shadow maws were beautiful. Their fur was black like deep space, but it seemed to shimmer with tiny points of light, like stars. They were bigger than he thought they would be, each one about the size of a large wolf, but they moved with grace and intelligence. Their eyes were golden yellow and very bright. When they saw him, they did not attack. Instead, they pressed closer together and watched him carefully. One of them, the smallest, made a soft sound that reminded Ji-ho of a worried whimper. Ji-ho could see they were hungry. Their ribs showed through their fur, and their water bowls were empty. Food containers lay scattered around the room, all empty. These creatures had been alone and starving for weeks. "Hello," Ji-ho said softly. He kept his voice calm and gentle. "Are you hungry?" The largest shadow maw tilted its head, studying him. Its ears moved forward, like it was trying to understand his words. Ji-ho slowly reached into his pack and pulled out a nutrition bar. He unwrapped it and held it out toward the creatures. "Here, food." The smallest shadow maw took a careful step forward, then stopped and looked back at the others. The largest one made a low, rumbling sound, not threatening, but like it was talking to the others. After a moment, the smallest one came closer. It sniffed Ji-ho's hand carefully, then very gently took the food with its teeth. Its touch was so careful that Jiho barely felt it. The creature stepped back and shared the food with the other two. Jiho smiled. This was definitely not the behavior of mindless killers. Over the next hour, he brought them water and more food from his emergency supplies. The creatures stayed together, always sharing everything equally. They watched him with intelligent eyes, and he could see them learning to trust him. The middle-sized one was the most curious. It came close enough to sniff his equipment and even touched his scanner with one careful claw. When the device beeped, the creature jumped back but did not run away. Instead, it looked at Jiho as if asking what the sound meant. The largest one seemed to be the protector of the group. It always positioned itself between Jiho and the other two, ready to defend them if needed. But it never showed aggression toward him, only caution. As the hours passed, Jiho realized these creatures were not just intelligent. They cared about each other. They communicated with soft sounds and gentle touches. When one seemed scared, the others would comfort it. This was a family. He thought about the research records he had read. The Vorthak had tried to make these creatures into weapons using pain and isolation, but Shadow Maws were social beings. Hurting them and keeping them alone would only make them afraid and sad, not aggressive. "You need names," Jiho said as he watched them. The largest one, who was always careful and watching for danger, he called Duri. The curious middle one became Haneul. The smallest, who moved quickly and seemed restless even when resting, he named Baram. When he spoke their names, their ears moved forward. Hanil made a soft, trilling sound, almost like it was trying to repeat the word. As night fell on the station, Jiho made a decision that would change everything. He could not leave these creatures here to starve. The galaxy believed they were monsters. But Jiho could see the truth. They were intelligent, caring beings who had been abandoned and mistreated. He activated his communicator and called his ship. "This is Jiho. Prepare for 3 additional passengers, large ones, and clear out the cargo bay. We are going to need the space." The creatures seemed to understand that something was happening. They moved closer to him, not afraid but hopeful. Duri touched Jiho's hand very gently with one massive paw. "Do not worry," Jiho told them. "You are coming with me. No one will hurt you anymore." He did not know it yet, but this moment would start a chain of events that would shake the entire galaxy. 3 weeks had passed since Jiho rescued the Shadow Maw cubs from the research station. His ship, the Steady Hand, had become their home. He had removed the walls between 3 cargo bays to make space for his new companions, who had grown much larger in just a few weeks. Duri now stood as tall as Jiho's chest, with Hanul and Baram close behind in size. Their starlight fur had become thick and healthy, and their golden eyes sparkled with intelligence and trust. They followed Jiho everywhere around the ship, learning how things worked and even helping with simple tasks. Hanul had figured out how to operate the door controls by watching Jiho. Baram could carry tools in his mouth without damaging them. Duri had learned to recognize different alert sounds and would come find Jiho whenever the ship's systems needed attention, but their favorite time was sleep. All 3 cubs would curl up around Jiho's bed, their warm bodies creating a protective circle. When Jiho had nightmares about his time in the war, their soft breathing and gentle presence helped him sleep peacefully. The galaxy, however, was not peaceful. News networks across known space were reporting about the mad human traveling with monsters. Bounty hunters had started following the Steady Hand, hoping to collect the reward the Galactic Council had placed on the Shadow Maws. Military patrols kept trying to intercept them. Jiho needed supplies and fuel, so he docked at Nexus 7, a large trading station near the frontier. As soon as he landed, he could feel the fear in the air. Other ship crews rushed to finish their business and leave. Station workers watched his ship from far away, ready to run. Captain Yoon Nari of the Terran Colonial Guard was waiting for him at the docking bay. She was a tall woman with short black hair and serious eyes. Behind her stood 6 armed soldiers, all wearing the blue uniforms of Earth's military. "Park Ji-ho," she said as he walked down his ship's ramp. "I am Captain Nari. I have orders to take you and your companions into custody." "On what charges?" Ji-ho asked calmly. "Possession of restricted biological weapons, endangering civilian populations, violation of galactic peace accords." She paused. "The list is quite long." Behind Ji-ho, 3 massive shadows appeared at the top of the ramp. The cubs had followed him, as they always did. Several of the soldiers raised their weapons, but Nari held up her hand to stop them. The cubs looked at the weapons, but showed no aggression. Instead, they moved to stand beside Ji-ho, one on each side and one slightly behind. Their posture was protective, but not threatening. "Biological weapons?" Ji-ho laughed. "Watch this." He pulled a small ball from his pocket and threw it across. The docking bay. "Hanul, fetch!" The curious cub bounded after the ball, his movements graceful and playful. He brought it back gently in his mouth and dropped it at Ji-ho's feet, then sat like a well-trained dog. His tail wagged, creating a soft, swishing sound. "Some weapon," Ji-ho said. Captain Nari frowned. This was not what she had expected to see. The intelligence reports described savage beasts barely under control. These creatures seemed calm and well-behaved. A sudden alarm rang through the station. The voice of the station commander echoed over the speakers. "All civilians to emergency shelters. Cathari raiders have breached the outer defense grid. All military personnel to defensive positions." The docking bay erupted into panic. Families with small children ran toward the shelters. Traders grabbed their most valuable goods and rushed for their ships. The sound of weapons fire could be heard from the upper levels. The 3 cubs immediately moved into action. Without any command from Ji-ho, they positioned themselves between the running civilians and the corridor that led to the fighting. Duri's lips pulled back to show his impressive teeth, but he was not looking at the humans. He was watching the corridor, ready to fight anything that came through it to hurt the innocent people. "They are protecting the civilians," Captain Nari said quietly, amazement in her voice. A group of Cathari pirates burst into the docking bay. They were tall, reptilian creatures with scales like armor and weapons in all 4 hands. They started firing at everything that moved, caring nothing for who they hit. The cubs moved as one. Bahram rushed to the left, his speed incredible as he leaped over cargo containers to attack the pirates from the side. Hanul went right, using his intelligence to find cover and strike from unexpected angles. Duri charged straight forward, his massive size and strength overwhelming the raiders. But what impressed Captain Nari most was how careful they were. Even in the middle of a fight, the cubs made sure no humans were hurt. When a small child fell near the battle, Duri shielded her with his body while still fighting the pirates. When Bahram knocked down a raider, he made sure the falling enemy did not land on any civilians. The fight was over in minutes. The Cathari were either unconscious or running away. The cubs immediately returned to the civilians, checking each person to make sure they were not hurt. Hanul gently nuzzled a crying child until she stopped being afraid. "I have never seen anything like this," Captain Nari whispered. She had watched the entire fight, and not once had the cubs shown aggression toward humans. Even when some of the panicking civilians had pushed past them roughly, the creatures had been gentle. A small girl, maybe 6 years old, walked up to Duri. The massive predator lowered his head so she could pet his nose. She giggled and hugged, his neck completely unafraid. "They are not weapons," Ji-ho said softly. "They are people. They think and feel and care about others. The galaxy has been wrong about them." Captain Nari looked at her soldiers. They had lowered their weapons and were staring at the cubs with wonder instead of fear. One young soldier was already asking Ji-ho if he could pet Bahram. "My orders were to arrest you," Nari said slowly. "I know, but I think my orders might be wrong." She holstered her weapon. The Terran Colonial Guard was created to protect human lives and human values. What I just saw? Those creatures saved lives today. They showed more honor and courage than many soldiers I have known. She turned to her troops. Stand down. Mr. Park Jiho and his companions are under the protection of the Colonial Guard. Captain? One of the soldiers asked. What about our orders? Nari looked at the little girl still hugging Duri, at the grateful families thanking Jiho and the cubs for saving them, at the way these supposed monsters had put themselves in danger to protect strangers. Sometimes, she said, following orders means knowing when orders are wrong. These beings just proved they are better protectors than we are. The real question is not whether we should arrest them. The question is, what else has the galaxy been wrong about? As news of the fight spread through Nexus 7, crowds began to gather. They came not with fear, but with curiosity and gratitude. Children wanted to pet the cubs. Adults asked Jiho questions about where they came from and how intelligent they were. For the first time since leaving the research station, Jiho felt hope. Maybe the galaxy could learn to see the truth about Shadow Maws. Maybe his new family would not have to live in hiding forever. But he did not know that their actions at Nexus 7 had been recorded and transmitted across the galactic networks. Soon, everyone would see what had happened here, and not everyone would be pleased with what they saw. The coordinates led them to a dead world at the edge of known space. Kethmar, the ancient Shadow Maw homeworld, appeared on their screens as a brown and gray planet with no signs of life. The Galactic Council had declared it a quarantine zone. 50 years ago, after the pest elimination campaign ended, Jiho's ship descended through the thin atmosphere toward a signal beacon planted by Dr. Lee Minsu, a human archaeologist who had been studying the planet in secret. The cubs pressed against the viewports, their golden eyes fixed on the world below. Something in their body language changed as they got closer to the surface. They became more alert, more focused, like they were remembering something important. The steady hand landed near the ruins of what had once been a great city. Massive towers made of black stone reached toward the sky, carved with intricate patterns that seemed to flow like water. Even damaged by time and war, the architecture was beautiful and clearly built by intelligent minds. Dr. Lee Minsu met them at the landing site. He was an older man with gray hair and kind eyes behind thick glasses. He had been alone on this world for 2 years, studying the ruins that the galaxy preferred to forget. Mr. Park, he said, shaking Jiho's hand. I saw the news reports about what happened at Nexus 7. I had to contact you. There are things about this place that the galaxy needs to know. The cubs stepped off the ship and immediately began behaving strangely. They sniffed the air deeply, then started moving toward the city ruins with purpose. It was like they knew exactly where they were going. They remember, Dr. Lee said quietly. Not personally, but in their genes. This was their home. He led them through the city streets. The buildings were sized for creatures much larger than humans, with doorways that could accommodate beings as large as the cubs. Everywhere there were signs of sudden violence, blast marks on walls, collapsed structures, scattered belongings that had been abandoned in panic. The genocide happened quickly, Dr. Lee explained as they walked. The Galactic Council sent fleets to every Shadow Maw world simultaneously. They called it Operation Clean Sweep. The official records say it was necessary to prevent the spread of dangerous predators. But look at this. He stopped in front of a building with walls covered in intricate carvings. The images showed Shadow Maws doing very unpredator-like things, building structures, creating art, caring for young ones, and working together in complex groups. These are not the cave paintings of simple animals, Dr. Lee said. This is a record of civilization. They had technology, culture, society. They were people. Hanel approached the carved wall and touched it gently with one claw. He made a soft sound, almost like singing. Duri and Baram joined him, and together they began making a complex harmony of voices. The sound was beautiful and sad, like a song of mourning. "They know what this place is," Jiho whispered. Dr. Lee nodded. "I have found evidence of Shadow Moss settlements on 47 worlds, cities, farms, art galleries, schools for their young. The galactic databases describe them as mindless beasts. But every archaeological site tells the same story. They were a peaceful, highly intelligent species. They continued deeper into the city. Dr. Lee showed them libraries with books written in Shadow Moss script, workshops where intricate tools had been made, and gardens where they had grown food. In one building, they found what appeared to be a school, with small desks sized for Shadow Maw cubs and walls covered with what looked like children's artwork. The cubs moved through these spaces with growing emotion. They touched objects carefully, sniffed at books, and continued their mournful singing. In the school, Baram found a toy, a small carved animal that looked like it had been dropped by a frightened child. He picked it up gently and carried it with him. "The worst part," Dr. Lee said, "is that I have found evidence they knew what was coming. The final entries in their records talk about receiving warnings from other worlds under attack. They tried to send messages to the Galactic Council offering to relocate to uninhabited planets. They wanted to avoid conflict." "What happened to those messages?" Jiho asked, though he already suspected the answer. "Never answered. The Council had already made their decision." Dr. Lee's voice was bitter. "I found the real records in the Council archives. They knew Shadow Maws were intelligent. They knew they were peaceful. But they were afraid." "Afraid of what?" "Of competition. Shadow Maws lived longer than most species. They were physically stronger. Their technology was starting to advance rapidly. Some Council members worried they might become too powerful to control." Dr. Lee shook his head. "So they decided to eliminate them before that could happen." They reached the center of the city, where a tall spire made of crystal rose from a circular plaza. The cubs immediately moved toward it, their behavior becoming more ritualistic. They arranged themselves around the base of the spire and began a new song, this one more complex and haunting than before. "It is a memorial," Dr. Lee said softly. "Every Shadow Moss city had one. They used them to remember their dead and celebrate their ancestors." As the cubs sang, something incredible happened. The crystal spire began to glow with soft light, responding to their voices. Images appeared in the crystal, faces of Shadow Maws, scenes of daily life, moments of joy and love and family. It was like watching home movies of the entire civilization. Jiho realized he was crying. These were not the images of monsters or predators. These were people living normal lives, raising children, creating beauty, finding happiness in simple things. And they had all been murdered because other species were afraid of what they might become. "How many died?" he asked. "Best estimates are 12 billion, Dr. Lee replied. "Across all their worlds, men, women, children, all of them." The cubs finished their song and approached the memorial. One by one, they touched the crystal with their noses like they were paying respects to the dead. Duri's touch lingered the longest, and new images appeared. Warriors defending their homes, families saying goodbye, acts of courage and sacrifice in the face of overwhelming force. "They fought back," Jiho observed. "Of course they did. But they were scientists and artists and teachers trying to defend their homes against trained military forces. They never had a chance." Dr. Lee wiped his eyes. "The saddest part is finding the children's shelters. Parents hid their cubs in deep bunkers, hoping they would survive. Most of the shelters were found and destroyed, but some cubs survived," Jiho finished. "Very few. Maybe a few dozen across the entire galaxy. Hidden, scattered, alone. The 3 you found at the research station were probably the last cubs born before the genocide." They would have been infants when their parents died. Jiho looked at his companions with new understanding. Duri, Hanol, and Bahram were not just intelligent animals he had rescued. They were the last children of an entire civilization. They carried in their genes the memories, culture, and dreams of billions of people who had been murdered for the crime of existing. As they walked back toward the ship, the cubs moved differently. They seemed more confident, more aware of who they were. They had found their heritage and understood their place in the universe. "What will you do now?" Dr. Lee asked. Jiho looked at his family, then at the ruined city behind them. "The galaxy believes a lie about these people. They need to know the truth. That will be dangerous. The Council will not want their crimes exposed. Then we will have to be stronger than they are." Jiho touched Duri's shoulder, feeling the solid warmth and strength there. "We have something they do not." "What is that?" "We have the truth, and we have each other." He smiled grimly. "Besides, they made one big mistake when they tried to eliminate the Shadow Maws." "What mistake?" "They left some alive, and now those survivors have a human family." Jiho's eyes hardened with determination. "They are about to learn why that is a very dangerous thing to do." The message reached every human world within days. Video footage from Nexus 7 showing 3 massive Shadow Maws protecting civilians. Archaeological evidence from Kethmar proving Shadow Maw intelligence and culture. Dr. Lee Minsu's recordings of the Memorial Crystal, with its images of a peaceful civilization destroyed by genocide. The galaxy's reaction was swift and divided. On Earth, protesters filled the streets demanding answers from the Terran colonial government. Human colonies across the frontier began questioning their membership in the Galactic Council. But in the council chambers on Centraxis Prime, emergency sessions were called to discuss containment of the human problem. Commander Han Woo-jin received his orders while stationed at the Titan defense platform. He was a career military officer, respected for his tactical skills and unquestioning loyalty. His unit, the Pack Hunters, specialized in tracking down threats to galactic security. "Your target is Park Jiho and 3 Shadow Maw specimens," General Morrison told him over the secure channel. "The Council considers them a clear and present danger to galactic stability." "Sir, the reports suggest the Shadow Maws are non-hostile," Woo-jin said carefully. "The reports are unreliable. Humans have a documented weakness for forming emotional attachments to dangerous species. Mr. Park has clearly been compromised by extended exposure to the specimens." The general's voice was cold. "Your orders are to terminate the targets and retrieve any research data for proper analysis." After the call ended, Woo-jin sat in his quarters staring at the mission files. Something about this felt wrong. The Pack. Hunters were usually sent after actual threats, pirate fleets, terrorist cells, rogue AI systems. This felt more like an execution than a legitimate military operation. He called his grandmother, Kim Sun-hee, who lived in a retirement community on Mars. She was 93 years old and had been one of Earth's first ambassadors to the Galactic Council. "Grandmother, I need to ask you about something that happened before I was born. The Shadow Maw extinction. You were there for the vote, were you not?" There was a long pause on the other end of the call. "Why are you asking about that, Woo-jin?" "I have been given orders related to the survivors that were recently discovered." Another pause, longer this time. "Those poor creatures. I always wondered if any had escaped." Her voice became sad. "Yes, I was there for the vote. It was not Earth's finest moment." "What do you mean?" "The evidence was clear that Shadow Maws were intelligent social beings. Several species presented proof of their technological capabilities and peaceful nature. But the Council was terrified. They had just finished a costly war with the Zerion Empire, and the thought of another powerful species emerging was too much for them to handle. But if they were peaceful, fear makes people do terrible things, grandson. The vote was close, much closer than the official records show. Earth voted against the extinction order, along with 3 other species. But we were outnumbered. Kim Sun-hee's voice cracked slightly. I still have nightmares about the images they showed us afterward. Entire worlds burned, children killed in their hiding places. We told ourselves it was necessary, but deep down, we all knew it was murder. Wu Jin felt sick. Grandmother, my orders are to kill the survivors. Then you must choose, Wu Jin. Will you be a soldier who follows orders, or will you be a human who does what is right? Meanwhile, on the steady hand, Jiho was learning that his 3 companions had grown much larger and more capable. Duri now stood nearly 8 feet tall, at the shoulder, with muscles like steel cables under his starlight fur. Hanol had developed an uncanny ability to understand human technology, often solving problems before Jiho even realized they existed. Baram had become incredibly fast, able to move through the ship's corridors like flowing shadow. But more importantly, they had begun to communicate more clearly with Jiho. Through a combination of gestures, sounds, and body language, they could express complex ideas. They understood they were being hunted, and they understood why. You want to protect me, Jiho said as they discussed their options in the ship's common area. But I cannot ask you to fight your own people's killers. You should find somewhere safe to hide. Duri made a series of sounds that Jiho had learned meant disagreement. The big shadow maw touched Jiho's chest with one gentle claw, then touched his own chest, then gestured to include Hanol and Baram. Family, Jiho translated. Yes, we are family. But, Hanol interrupted with his own sequence of sounds and gestures. He pointed to the communication array, then to images of other humans they had saved, then back to Jiho. You think other humans will help us if we can reach them? Jiho asked. Baram joined the conversation, his movements quick and emphatic. He showed them tactical displays on the ship's computer, pointing out escape routes and defensive positions. His meaning was clear. They would fight, but they would be smart about it. Their first pursuers found them at the fuel depot on Kepler Station. A squad of Zenthari bounty hunters, hired by someone with deep pockets and no questions, asked. The Zenthari were professional killers who specialized in hunting dangerous prey. The attack came at night while Jiho was sleeping. The cubs had been taking turns on watch, a habit they had developed since leaving Kethmar. Duri's warning growl woke Jiho just as the first explosions rocked the ship. The bounty hunters had expected to find one human trying to control 3 savage beasts. Instead, they encountered a coordinated team that moved like a single organism. Jiho provided tactical support and technical expertise, while the cubs used their speed, strength, and intelligence to outmaneuver enemies with superior weapons. Hanul disabled the bounty hunter's ship by somehow accessing its computer systems and shutting down its engines. Baram used the station's maintenance tunnels to attack from unexpected angles. Duri simply overpowered anyone who got close to Jiho, his massive strength making their weapons useless at close range. The fight was over in 20 minutes. The bounty hunters were unconscious and tied up, their equipment confiscated. But more importantly, the entire battle had been recorded by the station's security systems. Within hours, the footage was spreading across the human networks. People could see the tactical intelligence the cubs displayed, the way they protected not just Jiho but also innocent bystanders who got caught in the crossfire. They saw creatures who fought with honor and precision, not mindless savagery. Commander Wu Jin watched the footage from his command ship as his fleet approached Kepler Station. His tactical analysis confirmed what he had begun to suspect. These were not dangerous animals. They were people. Highly intelligent people who had been traumatized by genocide and were now defending their adopted family. Sir, his communications officer reported, we are receiving incoming messages from Earth Fleet Command. They are contradicting our Orders. Explain. Earth is withdrawing from the Joint Task Force. They are ordering all human vessels to stand down and return to base. Wu Jin smiled grimly. It seems someone back home has been watching the same footage we have. But not everyone was backing down. The Hegemony Council had authorized the use of non-human forces to complete the mission. Vorthak battlecruisers were already moving to intercept the Steady Hand. The same species that had originally captured and tortured the cubs was now coming to finish what they had started. "Sir?" his second-in-command asked. "What are our orders?" Wu Jin looked at the tactical display showing the approaching Vorthak fleet, then at the images of 3 Shadowmaw cubs who had risked their lives to save strangers. He thought about his grandmother's words and the choice she had faced 50 years ago. "Our orders," he said clearly, "are to protect human citizens and their allies from hostile forces. Mr. Park Ji-ho and his companions qualify for protection under Colonial Guard regulations." "Sir, that is not what the mission briefing said." Then the mission briefing was wrong. Wu Jin turned to his crew. "Signal the Vorthak fleet. Tell them they are in violation of human territorial sovereignty. Any attack on the Steady Hand will be considered an act of war against the Terran colonial government." As alarms began sounding throughout his ship, Wu Jin opened a channel to the Steady Hand. "Mr. Park, this is Commander Han Wu Jin of the Colonial Guard. You and your family are under our protection. We are here to escort you safely to human space." The response came not from Ji-ho, but from one of the cubs. Duri's deep, rumbling voice came through the speakers, making sounds that somehow conveyed gratitude and recognition of honor given and received. "You are welcome," Wu Jin replied, surprising himself by understanding the meaning, if not the words. "Now let us go home." Haven's Rest was supposed to be neutral ground. The small world at the border between human and alien space had been the site of the first peaceful contact between humans and the Galactic Council 200 years ago. It was where species came, to resolve differences without violence. But as the Steady Hand approached the planet, Ji-ho could see that neutrality was about to end. Dozens of ships filled the space around Haven's Rest. Most belonged to the Hegemony Council, but human vessels were there too, including Commander Wu Jin's fleet and ships from the Colonial Guard. "They are really going to do this here," Captain Nari said from the bridge of her cruiser, Defiant Dawn. She had joined Wu Jin's group after Earth officially withdrew support from the hunt. "They are going to start a war over 3 cubs, not cubs anymore," Ji-ho corrected over the communication channel. "Look at them." On the view screen, Duri, Hanul, and Baram could be seen moving around the Steady Hand's cargo bay. In the weeks since leaving Kethmar, they had reached full adult size. Duri stood nearly 10 feet tall, his starlight fur thick and magnificent. Hanul's intelligent eyes missed nothing as he monitored the ship's systems. Baram moved with deadly grace, ready for whatever was coming. They were no longer lost cubs seeking protection. They were Shadowmaw warriors, the last of their kind, standing ready to fight for their adopted family. The planet's surface was already busy with activity. Dr. Choi Yunji, a human ethologist, had arrived with a team of researchers and several prominent human journalists. They were broadcasting live footage of the cubs interacting peacefully with humans, providing scientific evidence of Shadowmaw intelligence and emotional complexity. But they were not alone on the planet. A full Hegemony battle group had landed on the other side of the continent, led by General Vex Thul of the Vorthak military. The same species that had tortured the cubs in their laboratory was now commanding the forces sent to eliminate them. Kim, Sun-hee, Commander Wu Jin's grandmother, had also come to Haven's Rest. At 93, she moved slowly, but her mind was sharp as ever. She carried with her a data pad containing records from the original Hegemony debates about Shadowmaw extinction. "These are the real files," she told the assembled reporters. "Not the sanitized versions in the public databases. You can see here that 17 different species presented evidence of Shadow Maw intelligence and peaceful intentions. The Council knew exactly what they were doing when they voted for genocide. She played audio recordings of the debates. Council. Members could be heard discussing the Shadow Maw problem in cold, calculating terms. They talked about potential threats and preemptive solutions. They never once mentioned the millions of families that would be destroyed. The cubs listened to the recordings with growing agitation. Hearing the voices of those who had ordered their people's deaths affected them deeply. But instead of rage, they showed something more human, sadness and determination to make sure it never happened again. Dr. Choi Yoonji documented everything. She recorded the cubs solving complex puzzles, creating what could only be called art by arranging objects in meaningful patterns and demonstrating emotional responses that were clearly sophisticated and intentional. This is not just intelligence, she explained to the cameras. This is consciousness. These beings have inner lives as rich and complex as any human. They think about the past and plan for the future. They create meaning from their experiences. They are people. As the day wore on, more ships arrived in orbit. Some came to support the hegemony position, but others came to witness history. Word was spreading across the galaxy that something important was happening at Haven's Rest. The showdown began when General Vex Thule demanded that all humans surrender the specimens for proper disposal. He landed his shuttle at the human camp with a full military escort, expecting quick compliance. Instead, he found himself facing not just Ji-Ho and his 3 companions, but dozens of humans who had placed themselves between the Vorthak soldiers and the cubs. Dr. Choi Yoonji stood directly in front of Duri, her arms spread wide. Captain Nari and her crew formed a protective line. Even Kim Sun-hee, despite her age, positioned herself where the Vorthak would have to go through her to reach the cubs. "You are interfering with a lawful operation," General Vex Thule declared, his reptilian features twisted with anger. "Lawful?" Kim Sun-hee laughed bitterly. "General, I was there when your people voted for this genocide. I know what laws you broke to make it happen. The only crime here is what your species did 50 years ago." Commander Wu Jin arrived with his full unit of pack hunters, elite human soldiers trained for the most dangerous missions. But instead of arresting anyone, they took defensive positions around the cubs and civilians. "Commander, you are in violation of direct orders from the Hegemony Council," General Vex Thule said. "I follow orders from Earth Command," Wu Jin replied calmly, "and Earth has determined that these beings are under human protection." The tension escalated quickly. Vorthak soldiers raised their weapons, and the humans responded by forming a tighter protective circle. The cubs sensed the danger and moved into position to defend their human friends, but they were careful not to appear threatening. They knew that any aggressive action would be used as justification for violence. Then something unexpected happened. Duri stepped forward, moving slowly and deliberately. He approached General Vex Thule directly, stopping just outside weapons range. The massive Shadow Maw looked directly into the Vorthak general's eyes and began to speak, not in human words, but in the complex harmonies of the Shadow Maw language. His voice carried across the camp, deep and resonant and unmistakably intelligent. He spoke for several minutes, his tone moving from formal to pleading to sorrowful. "What is he saying?" one of the reporters asked Dr. Choi Yoonji. I think he is asking why," she whispered, tears in her eyes. "Why they killed his people. Why they are still trying to kill the survivors. He is asking for an explanation that makes sense." General Vex Thule listened to the entire speech, his expression unreadable. When Duri finished, there was complete silence across the camp. "It speaks," the general said finally. "He," Kim Sun-hee corrected firmly. "He speaks. He is not an it. The specimens were supposed to be non-sapient. The specimens are people," Commander Wu Jin said. "People whose families you murdered." The general looked around at the faces watching him. Humans who had risked everything to protect 3 survivors of his people's genocide, journalists recording every word, soldiers who were supposed to be his allies but were clearly having doubts about their orders. "This changes nothing," he declared, but his voice lacked conviction. "The council has made its decision." "Then the council will have to go through us," Jiho said, stepping forward to stand beside Duri. "All of us." Behind him, the cubs moved into a protective formation, not around themselves, but around the humans who had become their family. They were ready to die defending the people who had shown them kindness when the rest of the galaxy offered only hatred. As night fell on Haven's Rest, both sides maintained their positions. Overhead, the fleets watched and waited. Across the galaxy, billions of beings watched the live broadcasts, seeing perhaps for the first time what humanity was really like when their moral code was challenged. The final battle was coming. But it would not be fought the way anyone expected. "Whatever happens," Jiho said to his 3 companions, "I want you to know that meeting you has been the greatest privilege of my life." Duri touched Jiho's shoulder with one massive paw and made a sound that needed no translation. It meant the same thing in any language: family. The attack came at dawn, but not from the direction anyone expected. General Vex Thul had been ordered by the Hegemony Council to end the situation quickly and quietly. But as his forces prepared to move against the human camp, explosions erupted across their positions. The attack was not coming from the humans or the cubs. It was coming from orbit. 3 human dreadnoughts had jumped into the system during the night. The Earth Defense Force had arrived, along with colonial fleets from a dozen human worlds. Admiral Sarah Chen's voice echoed across all communication frequencies. "This is Admiral Chen of the Earth Defense Force. By order of the Terran Colonial Senate, any attack on human citizens or their allies will be considered an act of war against all human territories. You have 10 minutes to withdraw your forces." General Vex Thul looked up at the sky, where human warships were taking defensive positions around Haven's Rest. "This is madness. You would start an interstellar war over 3 animals?" "3 people," Commander Wujin corrected. "And yes, we would. That is what humans do. We protect our family." On Earth, the Senate was in emergency session. The live broadcasts from Haven's Rest had shown billions of humans exactly what their government had voted for 50 years ago. Public outrage was unlike anything in recent memory. Protesters filled the streets of every major city demanding justice for the Shadow Maw genocide. Senator Maria Rodriguez stood before the packed chamber, holding a data tablet with the evidence Kim Sun-hee had provided. "My fellow senators, we have a choice to make. We can continue to be complicit in one of the greatest crimes in galactic history, or we can stand up for what we know is right." She played the audio recordings of Duri speaking to General Vex Thul. The Shadow Maw's words had been translated by human linguists working around the clock. His speech was a formal request for justice, delivered in the ancient diplomatic language of his people. "This being," Senator Rodriguez continued, "spoke with more dignity and honor than most of us show. In our daily debates, he asked for understanding, not revenge. He pleaded for peace, not war. He is everything the Hegemony Council claimed his people were not." The vote was overwhelming. The Terran Colonial Senate officially withdrew from all extinction protocols and declared the surviving Shadow Maws to be under permanent human protection. But more than that, they authorized Admiral Chen to use any force necessary to defend them. Back on Haven's Rest, the standoff continued. But now it was clear that the humans were not going to back down. More importantly, other species were beginning to question their own government's positions. The Altarian ambassador arrived unexpectedly, carrying a message from her people's council. The Altarian Republic formally recognizes the sapient status of the Shadow Maw species and condemns the actions taken against them 50 years ago. She was followed by representatives from the Kalari Federation, the Free Worlds Alliance, and even some individual members of species that had voted for the genocide. Each one brought evidence that their people had known the truth about shadow maws, but had remained silent out of fear or political convenience. Dr. Choi Yoonji continued documenting everything. She had recorded hours of footage showing the cubs' intelligence, emotional depth, and capacity for both forgiveness and leadership. But the most powerful moment came when young human children from the research team began playing with Hanul and Baram. The sight of human children laughing as they rode on the backs of creatures the galaxy called monsters broke something fundamental in the opposition's narrative. Even some of the Vorthak soldiers began lowering their weapons. How? General Vex Thul asked Jiho as they watched the children play. How are they not attacking? Every simulation, every model predicted they would be uncontrollably aggressive. Because you were studying them wrong, Jiho explained patiently. Shadow maws are social creatures. When you isolated them and hurt them, you were creating the very aggression you feared. But when you treat them with kindness and respect, they respond the same way. We were told they were too dangerous to coexist with, by people who never tried to coexist with them. Jiho gestured toward Duri, who was gently helping a small girl who had fallen while playing. Look at him. Really look. Do you see a monster, or do you see someone trying to take care of others? The general watched as Duri carefully checked the child for injuries, then made soft, comforting sounds until she stopped crying. When she hugged his massive neck, he remained perfectly still, letting her feel safe. I see. The general paused, struggling with concepts that challenged everything he had been taught. I see someone who cares. The breakthrough came when 3 more shadow maws were found. Dr. Lee Min-soo had continued searching the ruins of other worlds, and his persistence paid off. On a remote planet in the Outer Rim, he discovered a small group of survivors who had been hiding in deep caves for 50 years. When news reached Haven's Rest, the cubs' reaction was immediate and intense. For the first time since Jiho had known them, Duri, Hanul, and Baram were not the only members of their species. They sang together in harmony, their voices carrying across the camp with joy and relief that was impossible to misunderstand. The rescue mission became a joint operation between human forces and volunteers from several other species. When the 3 new shadow maws arrived at Haven's Rest, the reunion was watched by billions across the galaxy. The new arrivals were thin and traumatized, but alive. They had survived by hiding, but now they could finally step into the light. Thus, 6 shadow maws communicated in their complex harmonic language, sharing stories and memories. The older survivors told of the day the fleets came, of families torn apart and worlds burned. But they also spoke of hope kept alive in the darkness, of faith that someday the truth would be known. General Vex Thul watched the reunion in silence. Finally, he removed his sidearm and placed it on the ground at Duri's feet. In the formal language of Vorthak military tradition, he spoke words that stunned his own soldiers. I formally request forgiveness for the crimes committed by my people, against yours. Duri looked down at the weapon, then at the general. Slowly, carefully, he picked up the gun and handed it back to the Vorthak officer. His meaning was clear. Forgiveness granted, but also trust offered. The moment was broadcast across the galaxy. Within hours, protests began on Vorthak worlds as their own people demanded answers about what had been done in their name. Other species that had participated in the genocide faced similar uprisings. The Hegemony Council tried to maintain their position, but it was too late. The truth was out, and the galaxy was changing. 1 year later, Jiho walked through Central Park in New Seoul with his extended family. Duri, Hanul, and Baram were joined by Sarang and Kakum, 2 young cubs who had been born to the rescued survivors. The park had been redesigned to accommodate beings of all sizes, with pathways and structures sized for both humans and shadow maws. Children played around the massive creatures without fear. Families gathered for picnics in the shade of trees, planted in memory of the genocide victims. A memorial wall listed the names of 12 billion shadow maws who had died, their names reconstructed from ruins by teams of human and alien archaeologists working together. The cubs, now adults with cubs of their own, had learned to speak some human languages, while many humans had learned basic shadow maw harmonics. The two species lived together, worked together, and were building something new together. Captain Nari, now Admiral Nari, stopped by during her morning run. She wore the uniform of the new Interspecies Protection Force, a joint human-alien organization dedicated to preventing future genocides. "Any word from the Colony Committee?" she asked Jiho. "The new beginning launches next month," he replied, watching as young Sarang practiced flying with a group of human children who had built glider wings. 300 families, both human and shadow maw, heading to Kepler 438b to build the first integrated settlement. "Think it will work?" "Look around," Jiho said, gesturing at the park where two species that had never been supposed to coexist were building a life together. "We are already proving it works." Duri approached them, now a father of 3 and respected as an elder despite his relatively young age. He spoke in careful English, his voice still carrying the harmonic undertones of his native language. "Ship ready soon?" "Very soon," Jiho confirmed. "Are you excited?" "Excited, yes. Also nervous." Duri's golden eyes showed the same mix of hope and worry that any parent might feel about moving to a new world. "But family together, that makes all things possible." Admiral Nari smiled. "You know, 5 years ago, if someone had told me I would be having casual conversations with a shadow maw about colonization plans, I would have recommended them for psychiatric evaluation." 5 years ago, Duri replied with what could only be described as a grin, "I would have recommended same thing as." The sun set over New Sol. Jiho reflected on how much had changed. The galaxy was not perfect. There were still those who opposed shadow maw integration, still politicians who wanted to return to the old ways. But change had begun, and it was spreading. Children who grew up playing with shadow maw cubs would never see them as monsters. Adults who worked alongside shadow maw colleagues learned to value their intelligence and perspective. Slowly but surely, fear was being replaced by understanding.